never imagined I'd be standing at my husband's funeral watching my own son walk in with the woman who destroyed our family. After 32 years of marriage to Brian, I thought I knew pain. I was wrong. The church was filled with familiar faces, colleagues from the investment firm where Brian had worked for decades, neighbors, a few relatives who had flown in. I stood alone at the front, my black dress feeling too tight around my chest, making it hard to breathe. The casket was closed. Brian had been clear about that in his final days. Mom. The word cut through the murmured conversations. I turned to see my son Timothy standing in the center aisle, his arm linked with a woman I'd seen only in photographs I wasn't supposed to find. Melissa, tall, blonde, at least 15 years younger than me. She wore an expensive black dress that hugged her figure in a way that seemed inappropriate for a funeral, but it was the smile on her face that froze my blood. Not a smile of grief or even politeness, but of triumph. "This is the real woman of my father's life," Timothy announced, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. "And the real mother to me." The words hit me like physical blows. I swayed slightly, grateful for the pew behind me. Timothy had left 5 years ago after a bitter argument with his father. I had called, written letters, begged for reconciliation. He never responded. Now I understood why. He approached me, extending a cream-colored envelope. "This house is no longer yours," he said coldly. "It will go to those who deserve it." I took the envelope with trembling fingers, unable to process what was happening. Melissa stepped forward, her perfume engulfing me as she leaned in close. "I've waited a long time for this day," she whispered. "Brian always promised me everything would be mine in the end." The service passed in a blur. I was aware of sympathetic glances, of whispers, of Melissa sitting where I should have been, accepting condolences as if she were the widow. Timothy sat beside her, stone-faced, refusing to look in my direction. When it was over, I drove home alone to the house where Brian and I had built our life together, the house that, according to my son, was no longer mine. I couldn't bring myself to open the envelope. Instead, I went to Brian's study, the one place in the house he had always kept private. In the weeks since his diagnosis, when cancer had spread through his body with terrifying speed, he had spent hours in this room alone. "Just putting things in order," he'd say whenever I asked. I had respected his privacy, thinking he needed space to come to terms with his mortality. Now I wondered what else he had been doing. The study smelled of his cologne, leather, and old books. I ran my fingers over his desk, remembering how he used to look sitting there, powerful and assured. How had I missed the signs that he was living a double life? I opened the bottom drawer, the one he always kept locked. The key had been on his keychain, which the funeral home had returned to me along with his wallet and watch. Inside, I found a leather journal I'd never seen before. The first page bore a date from just 5 weeks ago. The handwriting was unmistakably Brian's, though more uneven than normal, affected by his illness and medication. "I don't have much time left," it began, "and there are things I need to confess." I sank into his chair, heart pounding as I read. The room seemed to tilt and spin around me. Brian detailed his 15-year affair with Melissa, whom he'd met when she was a young intern at his firm. He described how he had systematically diverted funds from our joint accounts to set her up in an apartment, how he had introduced her to our son during Timothy's college years, cultivating a relationship between them behind my back. I convinced Timothy that his mother had been unfaithful, that she had nearly bankrupted us with secret spending, Brian wrote. I showed him falsified bank statements, planted evidence. I needed him on my side. I needed him to hate her as much as I had come to hate myself. Tears blurred my vision as I read how methodically he had turned my son against me, all to protect his secret life. The pain was almost unbearable, but then I turned the page, and everything changed. Now that death is near, I see clearly what I've done, the lies, the betrayal. Not just the affair, but the financial crimes I've committed. Melissa thinks she'll inherit everything, that she and Timothy will live comfortably on my fortune. She doesn't know that most of the money is gone, gambled away in high-risk investments that failed catastrophically. She doesn't know about the fraud investigations that will soon uncover what I've done. I read on, my hands shaking. Brian had been cooking the books at his investment firm for years, creating false returns, stealing from clients, including, I realized with horror, my parents' retirement fund, which he had offered to manage after my father's stroke. I've written a full confession, the final page read. Not just about the affair, but about the fraud, the embezzlement, all of it. My lawyer has instructions to deliver it to the authorities the day after my funeral. Deborah deserves the truth, and Melissa deserves what's coming to her. As I closed the journal, the doorbell rang. Through the study window, I could see a black car parked in our driveway. My son and Melissa stood on the porch, suitcases beside them. They were here to claim their inheritance. They were here to take my home. I looked down at the journal in my hands, at the envelope I still hadn't opened, and made a decision. They wanted to destroy me, to erase 32 years of my life. But Brian's final confession had given me something unexpected, the truth, and perhaps, just perhaps, a way to fight back. The doorbell rang again, more insistently this time. I slipped the journal into my purse and stood up, straightening my spine. Whatever was in that envelope, whatever they planned to do to me, I was no longer just the grieving widow. I was a woman with knowledge, dangerous knowledge. And for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of power. I walked to the door, my heart racing but my resolve firm. Let them think they had won. The real battle was just beginning. I took a deep breath and opened the door. Timothy's eyes were cold, distant, so different from the warm gaze of the boy I had raised. Melissa stood slightly behind him, her smile barely concealing her impatience. We don't need to make this difficult, Timothy said, pushing past me into the foyer. The papers are clear. Dad changed his will 3 years ago. I clutched my purse containing Brian's journal. I haven't even read what's in the envelope yet. It doesn't matter if you've read it, Melissa said, stepping inside and looking around the house with undisguised greed. The house belongs to Timothy now. You have 24 hours to pack your essentials and leave. The coldness of it all, the calculated cruelty, made my knees weak. This was my home, the kitchen where I'd taught Timothy to bake cookies, the living room where we'd open Christmas presents every year, the garden I had nurtured for decades. I'd like to speak to my son alone, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Melissa laughed. Anything you have to say to him, you can say in front of me. Timothy didn't contradict her. Instead, he glanced at his watch. We don't have time for this. We've already been generous letting you stay until after the funeral. The movers are coming tomorrow. Movers. For my things. For whatever you don't take with you, he said dismissively. Dad left everything to me, the house, the accounts, his share of the firm. You get your personal items and a small allowance. It's all legal. I finally opened the envelope, scanning the contents quickly. It was exactly as Timothy had said. Brian had disinherited me almost completely. There was a monthly stipend mentioned, barely enough to rent a small apartment. Everything else went to Timothy, with provisions for Melissa described as his business partner. I looked up at my son, searching for any hint of the person I had known. Why are you doing this? What did I ever do to make you hate me so much? His face hardened. You really want to do this now? Fine. You cheated on Dad. You nearly bankrupted our family with your spending. You lied to both of us for years. That's not true, I whispered. None of that is true. I saw the evidence, Timothy's voice rose. Dad showed me everything, the bank statements, the hotel receipts, the text messages. Stop lying. The journal and my purse felt heavy. I could show it to him now, prove that Brian had fabricated everything. But something held me back. The raw hatred in Timothy's eyes told me he wouldn't believe me, not yet. And Melissa's presence made me cautious. I needed time to think, to plan. "I'll be out by tomorrow evening," I said quietly. Melissa smirked. "Smart choice. I'd hate to have to call the police to remove you. Can I at least have access to my bedroom to pack some clothes?" Timothy nodded curtly. "Just your personal things. Nothing else." I walked upstairs slowly, feeling their eyes on my back. In our bedroom, my bedroom, I closed the door and leaned against it, finally allowing silent tears to fall. 32 years of marriage, and this was what remained, a suitcase of clothes and a husband's confession that could destroy the lives of everyone involved, including my son. I packed methodically, selecting practical items rather than sentimental ones, photos of Timothy as a child, my mother's pearls, clothes, toiletries. As I worked, my mind raced. Where would I go? What would I do? The small stipend from Brian's will wouldn't sustain me for long, especially if what he'd written about financial problems was true. Then I remembered Rebecca, my college roommate who had reached out after seeing Brian's obituary online. She lived about an hour away and had offered help if I needed anything. I hadn't spoken to her in years. Brian had gradually isolated me from most of my friends, but now her offer seemed like a lifeline. I slipped into the bathroom and called her, speaking in hushed tones. She answered immediately. "Deborah, how are you holding up?" "Not well," I admitted, my voice breaking. "Rebecca, I hate to ask, but I need a place to stay. Just for a few days until I figure things out." "Of course," she said without hesitation. "My guest room is yours for as long as you need it." "What's happening?" I gave her the briefest explanation possible, promising more details later. "I'll be there tomorrow evening, if that's okay. I'll be waiting. And Deborah, whatever's going on, we'll face it together." I hung up feeling slightly stronger. At least I had somewhere to go, someone on my side. When I came downstairs with my suitcase, Melissa was already rearranging the living room, moving my favorite reading chair to the corner. She didn't even look up. Timothy stood at the window, staring out at the garden. "I'll be back tomorrow to collect the rest of my things," I said. He turned. For just a moment, I thought I saw uncertainty in his eyes. "Where will you go? Does it matter to you?" The words came out more bitter than I intended. The flicker of doubt vanished. "No, I guess it doesn't." I walked to the door, then paused. "There's something you should know, Timothy. Your father wasn't the man you thought he was. Neither of you knows the whole truth." Melissa moved closer to him, protective, possessive. "More lies. Give it up, Deborah. You've lost." I looked directly at my son. "Check the firm's accounts. Ask questions. Do it before it's too late." I left before he could respond, walking to my car with as much dignity as I could muster. As I drove away from the only home I'd known for decades, I glanced in the rearview mirror. They stood in the doorway, watching me leave, already claiming ownership of my life. That night, in a sterile hotel room paid for with the last of my accessible cash, I read Brian's journal again. The more I read, the more horrified I became. The depth of his deception, the calculated way he had destroyed our family, it was breathtaking in its cruelty. And yet, in those final pages, there was genuine remorse. "I've ruined everything," he had written. Deborah deserved better. Our son deserved better. The clients who trusted me deserved better. I can't undo what I've done, but I can at least ensure that the truth comes out. I traced my fingers over his handwriting, remembering the man I had married, wondering when he had changed, or if he had always been capable of such betrayal. The next morning, exhausted from a sleepless night, I checked out of the hotel and headed back to the house to collect the few remaining items I couldn't fit in my first trip. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked at the curb. A man in a suit stood on the porch, speaking with Timothy, whose face had gone pale. I parked and approached slowly. The man turned toward me, his expression professionally neutral. "Mrs. Patterson?" he asked. "I'm Detective Ronald Wilson. I need to ask you some questions about your husband's business activities." Timothy's eyes met mine, wide with shock and the first flickers of fear. Melissa appeared in the doorway behind him, her confident smile nowhere to be seen. The detective held up a document. "We have a warrant to search these premises in connection with a major fraud investigation. And I'm afraid, Mrs. Patterson, that we'll need you to come with us as well." The ground seemed to shift beneath my feet. This was happening too fast. Brian's confession was supposed to protect me, not implicate me. As the detective continued explaining something about potential co-conspirators, I realized with growing horror that in my grief and shock, I had missed something crucial. What if Brian's final confession wasn't meant to help me at all? What if it was his last, most devastating betrayal? The detective's office was cold and impersonal, with blank walls and uncomfortable chairs designed to keep you on edge. I sat across from Detective Wilson, my hands clutching a paper cup of watery coffee more for warmth than for the caffeine. "Mrs. Patterson, I need you to understand the severity of what we're investigating," he said, spreading photographs and documents across the table. "Your husband's firm has defrauded clients of nearly $40 million over the past decade." The number made my head spin. "I didn't know," I whispered. "I had no access to the firm's accounts. Brian handled all our finances." Wilson studied me, his expression unreadable. "Your signature appears on several accounts where stolen funds were deposited." "That's impossible," I said, feeling a cold wave of dread wash over me. "I never signed anything like that." He slid a document toward me. There was my signature, or something very close to it. "This account in the Caymans received transfers totaling $6 million in the last 3 years alone." I stared at the signature, then looked up at him. "It's forged. I've never even been to the Cayman Islands. Your passport shows otherwise. You and your husband traveled there twice in the past 5 years." My mind raced. We had gone on those trips, but Brian had handled everything. He told me they were anniversary celebrations. I'd spent my days at the beach or the spa while he attended what he called brief business meetings. He told me they were vacations, I said, my voice small. I had no idea he was setting up accounts. Detective Wilson's expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Patterson, I've been doing this job for 20 years. I've heard every possible denial and excuse. If you cooperate now, tell us where the money is, it will go better for you." "I don't know where any money is. I just found out yesterday that Brian had been lying to me for years about everything." I hesitated, then reached for my purse. He left a confession in this journal. I handed it over, watching as Wilson scanned the pages with increasing interest. "This could be helpful," he said finally, "but it doesn't clear you completely. Your son claims you were fully aware of all financial decisions." The betrayal cut deep. "My son believes lies his father told him. Brian turned him against me years ago." Wilson made a note. "We'll need to verify everything. In the meantime, don't leave town. Your passport has been flagged." "Am I under arrest?" "Not at this moment, but the investigation is ongoing." I left the police station in a daze, walking several blocks before remembering I had my car. The world felt unreal, as if I were moving through a nightmare that kept getting worse. I checked my phone and found 3 missed calls from Rebecca. I hadn't made it to her house as planned. I called her back, struggling to keep my voice steady as I explained what had happened. "Stay right where you are," she said firmly. I'm coming to get you. You shouldn't be alone right now. An hour later, we sat in her cozy kitchen, a pot of real coffee between us. Rebecca listened without interruption as I told her everything: the funeral, Timothy and Melissa, the journal, the police interview. My God, Deborah, she said when I finished. I always knew there was something off about Brian, but this. What do you mean, off? I asked, suddenly alert. She hesitated. You probably don't want to hear this now. Please. I need to know everything. Rebecca sighed. Remember when you started dating him in college? How quickly he wanted to get serious. How he gradually pulled you away from the rest of us. I tried to talk to you about it once, but you were so in love. After your wedding, he made it clear your friends weren't welcome. That's why we all drifted away. I stared into my coffee cup, memories shifting and realigning. I thought everyone was just busy with their own lives, starting careers, families. He isolated you, Deborah. Classic control tactic. The realization hit me with startling clarity. My entire adult life had been built on Brian's lies and manipulation. Even my relationship with my son had been poisoned by his deception. I need to talk to Timothy, I said suddenly. Make him understand. Rebecca looked skeptical. After what you've just told me, do you think he'll listen? I have to try. He's my son. The next morning, after a night on Rebecca's guest bed where I barely slept, I drove back to my old house. The detective's car was gone, but another unfamiliar vehicle sat in the driveway, expensive, sleek, with corporate logos on the door. A man in a tailored suit was just leaving, shaking Timothy's hand at the door. I parked and waited until the man drove away before approaching. Timothy saw me coming, and his expression hardened. What are you doing here? We need to talk, I said. Without Melissa. She's not here. She's meeting with the firm's board of directors. His voice was tight with stress. Not that it's any of your business. The police questioned me yesterday about accounts I never knew existed. Something flickered in his eyes, doubt, perhaps. They questioned me too. Apparently, Dad's company is under investigation for fraud. It's worse than that, Timothy. Your father confessed to everything in his journal. He stole from clients, he created fake returns, and he set us both up to take the fall if he ever got caught. Timothy's face flushed with anger. That's ridiculous. Dad would never do that. The same dad who told you I cheated on him. Who showed you fake evidence that I'd spent all our money. Who turned you against me with lies. My voice broke. He manipulated both of us, Timothy. And now he's gone, and we're left to deal with the consequences. For just a moment, I thought I saw a crack in his certainty. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression changed to one of alarm. I have to go, he said abruptly. Timothy, please. Just read the journal. The police have it now, but I can tell you what it says. I have to go. He pushed past me toward his car. Melissa just texted. The board has frozen all the firm's assets. They're saying Dad embezzled millions. That's what I'm trying to tell you, I called after him. It's all in his confession. He paused, one hand on the car door. This can't be happening, he muttered, more to himself than to me. Then he looked back, his eyes suddenly vulnerable, reminding me of the little boy who used to run to me with his scraped knees and broken toys, trusting me to fix everything. If what you're saying is true, he said slowly, then everything I believed for the past 5 years has been a lie. Yes, I said simply. That's exactly what I'm saying. He seemed about to say more when his phone rang. He answered it, listening intensely. The color drained from his face. I'll be right there, he said, ending the call. He gave me one last look, confusion warring with years of cultivated resentment. That was Melissa. She's at the police station. They're arresting her as an accomplice. My heart raced. Timothy. I can't deal with this right now. He got into his car and slammed the door. As he drove away, I stood in the driveway of what had once been my home, feeling both vindicated and heartbroken. Back at Rebecca's house, I found her in conversation with an elegant older woman I didn't recognize. They both looked up as I entered. Deborah, Rebecca said, standing. This is Margaret Winters. She's a forensic accountant who worked with my firm before she retired. I thought she might be able to help. Margaret extended her hand. I've reviewed what Rebecca told me about your situation. If you're willing, I'd like to help you untangle this financial mess. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. Can you really do that? I've spent 40 years following money trails, Margaret said with quiet confidence. If there's evidence of your innocence or of your husband's guilt, I'll find it. Over the next several hours, I provided Margaret with every financial document I could remember, every account number, every property transaction. She took meticulous notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions that made me realize how little I actually knew about our finances. Brian insisted on handling everything, I explained, embarrassment coloring my voice. He said I shouldn't worry about it. Margaret's expression was kind but serious. That's a common tactic among financial abusers. They maintain control by keeping their partners in the dark. The term financial abuse had never occurred to me before, but it fit perfectly with what Brian had done. As evening approached, my phone rang with an unknown number. I answered cautiously. Mrs. Patterson, this is Detective Wilson. We need you to come in again tomorrow morning. We have some new information regarding your husband's case. What kind of information? I asked, my pulse quickening. I'd rather discuss it in person. 9 o'clock, my office. He paused. And Mrs. Patterson, you might want to bring a lawyer. I hung up, my momentary hope evaporating. They want me back at the station tomorrow. The detective said I should bring a lawyer. Rebecca and Margaret exchanged glances. My brother is an excellent criminal defense attorney, Margaret said. I can call him tonight. Criminal defense. The words made the situation suddenly, terrifyingly real. But I haven't done anything wrong. Which is exactly why you need proper representation, Margaret insisted. The authorities are building a case, and from what you've told us, your husband made sure there would be evidence pointing to you. Rebecca squeezed my hand. We're not going to let you face this alone. That night, I lay awake in the guest bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, I would walk into a police station with a lawyer, something I had never imagined doing in my entire law-abiding life. My home was gone, my son still doubted me, my reputation was in tatters, and somewhere there was money, millions of dollars, that could prove my innocence or seal my guilt. I was drifting into an uneasy sleep when my phone lit up with a text message. It was from Timothy. They've arrested Melissa. She's saying Dad made her do everything, that she was afraid of him. But she knew about the Cayman accounts, about everything. I don't know what to believe anymore. I sat up, fully awake now, and typed back, I'm meeting with the police tomorrow. I have someone helping me trace the money. Come with me. Let's find the truth together. I waited, watching the screen, my heart in my throat. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, his response came through, I'll be there. But not because I believe you. Because I need to know the truth. I sank back against the pillows, a complex mix of emotions washing over me. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation, but it was a start. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Timothy, there's something else you should know. I found a safe deposit box key in Dad's desk. The box is at First National. I'm going there in the morning before meeting you at the station. A safe deposit box I knew nothing about. What else had Brian hidden? What other secrets would we uncover? As exhaustion finally pulled me towards sleep, one thought kept circling in my mind. Tomorrow, for better or worse, the final pieces of Brian's deception would come to light. I just prayed I would be ready for whatever truths awaited us. The police station looked different in the morning light, less intimidating somehow, or maybe it was the presence of James Winters, Margaret's brother, walking beside me with quiet confidence. He had arrived at Rebecca's house at 7 that morning, impeccably dressed and thoroughly prepared after a late-night briefing from his sister. "Remember," he said as we approached the entrance, "answer only the questions asked. Don't volunteer information. If you're unsure, look to me before responding." I nodded, grateful for his calm guidance. My own emotions were a tangled mess of anxiety, hope, and dread. Timothy had texted an hour earlier, "At the bank now. We'll meet you at the station." Detective Wilson was waiting for us, looking tired but alert. He led us to the same interview room as before, acknowledging James with the wary respect of one professional for another. "Mrs. Patterson," he began once we were seated, "since we last spoke, we've made significant progress in our investigation." James leaned forward slightly. "Before my client answers any questions, I'd like to understand the nature of her involvement in your investigation. Is she a suspect, person of interest, or witness?" Wilson hesitated. "At this point, we're treating Mrs. Patterson as a person of interest. Her level of involvement in her husband's schemes remains unclear." "Then please proceed with that clarity in mind," James said smoothly. Wilson turned his attention back to me. "Mrs. Patterson, Melissa Jenkins, was arrested yesterday. She's been quite forthcoming in exchange for consideration in her own case." My heart raced. What did she say? She claimed she was merely following Brian's instructions, that he orchestrated everything and kept her in the dark about the full extent of his fraudulent activities. Wilson's expression was skeptical. "She also insists that you were an active participant." James touched my arm gently, a reminder to stay calm. "That's a lie," I said, keeping my voice steady. "As I've already told you, I knew nothing about any of this. Brian controlled all our finances." Wilson nodded, unsurprised by my denial. "Miss Jenkins provided us with detailed information about offshore accounts, shell companies, and the methods your husband used to siphon money from his clients. She claims you attended meetings with her and Brian where these matters were discussed openly." "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "The only time I ever met Melissa before the funeral was at a company Christmas party years ago. Brian introduced her as a junior associate." The door opened, and an officer handed Wilson a file. He reviewed it quickly, his expression changing subtly. "We've just received the preliminary report from our forensic accountants," he said, looking up at me. "The signatures on several key documents, including those offshore accounts, appear to be forgeries. Sophisticated ones, but forgeries nonetheless." Relief washed over me. "Because they are forgeries. I never signed those documents." "This doesn't clear you completely," Wilson cautioned, "but it does support your claim of being uninvolved in the creation of these accounts." James shifted forward. "Detective, given this new evidence, I believe it's appropriate to clarify my client's status. If you're no longer considering her a person of interest." Wilson held up a hand. "Not so fast, counselor. We still have questions about Mrs. Patterson's awareness of her husband's activities. $40 million doesn't disappear without leaving traces in their lifestyle. Our home was nice but not extravagant," I said. "Brian always said we needed to be conservative with our spending to save for retirement." The irony wasn't lost on me, his insistence on frugality while he was stealing millions. A knock at the door interrupted us. Wilson stepped out briefly, then returned looking intrigued. Your son is here, Mrs. Patterson, with something he believes is relevant to our investigation. Timothy entered, looking pale and exhausted. He barely glanced at me, his attention focused on a manila envelope he carried with near reverence, as if it might explode. Detective Wilson, he said formally, I found this in my father's safe deposit box this morning. I think you need to see it. Wilson accepted the envelope and opened it carefully. Inside was a USB drive and several documents. He examined the papers first, his eyebrows raising slightly. This appears to be a detailed confession, he said, along with account information for various offshore holdings. He looked at Timothy. Did you review these documents, Mr. Patterson? Timothy nodded stiffly. Yes. My father. He paused, swallowing hard. My father documented everything. The fraud, the manipulation, how he turned me against my mother with fabricated evidence. Finally, he looked at me, his eyes filled with confusion and the first glimmer of remorse. He lied to me about everything. The words I had longed to hear, acknowledgement of the truth, brought me no joy, only sadness for what my son must be feeling. Wilson inserted the USB drive into his laptop and spent several minutes reviewing its contents in silence. James used the opportunity to confer with me quietly, but I could barely focus on his words. My attention was fixed on Timothy, who stood awkwardly by the door, looking lost. Finally, Wilson looked up. This changes things considerably. The drive contains spreadsheets detailing every fraudulent transaction, along with video recordings of your husband explaining his actions. He turned to me. Including explicit statements that you had no knowledge of his illegal activities. James straightened. In that case, Detective, I believe we can agree that my client is no longer a person of interest but a potential witness. Wilson nodded slowly. It appears so, though we'll still need Mrs. Patterson's cooperation as we continue our investigation. Of course, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The relief was overwhelming, making me lightheaded. You're free to go for now, Wilson said, though please remain available for further questions. Outside the police station, the three of us, Timothy, James, and I, stood in awkward silence. James tactfully excused himself to make a phone call, leaving me alone with my son for the first time in years. Mom, Timothy began, his voice breaking slightly. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now, I told him, resisting the urge to reach out and touch his arm. It's a lot to process. He shook his head. I believed him. Everything he told me about you, the affairs, the spending, all of it. I never questioned any of it. He was very convincing, I said softly. He fooled everyone, Timothy, not just you. But I was your son, his voice was anguished. I should have known better. I should have at least given you a chance to defend yourself. A memory surfaced, Timothy at 17, stubbornly insisting he was right about something, refusing to listen to reason. Brian had laughed and said, once he makes up his mind, there's no changing it. Wonder where he gets that from. It had seemed like an innocent observation at the time. Now I recognized it as another seed planted, another manipulation. What was in the videos? I asked. The ones on the USB drive. Timothy's expression darkened. Dad, sitting in his study, explaining everything. How he started embezzling to cover investment losses. How he met Melissa and set her up as his accomplice. How he hesitated. How he deliberately drove a wedge between us because he knew I'd never forgive him if I learned the truth. I closed my eyes briefly, the pain of those lost years washing over me. And Melissa? What was her role in all this? According to Dad, she was a willing partner. She knew exactly what they were doing. Her innocent victim act for the police is just that, an act. His jaw tightened. She used me too. All those years, playing the supportive friend, the surrogate mother. She was just keeping me close to maintain her cover. James returned, ending our conversation. Good news, he said. Based on the new evidence, the detective has confirmed you're no longer under investigation, Mrs. Patterson. You're free to go about your life. What life? I said before I could stop myself. I have no home, no money, no. That's not entirely true, Timothy interrupted. He pulled another document from his pocket. Dad set up a separate account in your name, legitimately, with clean money. He called it his redemption fund. There's nearly $2 million in it. I stared at him in disbelief. What? It seems he had an attack of conscience at the end, Timothy explained. The letter with this account information says it's meant to secure your future, regardless of what happens with the legal proceedings against his estate. $2 million. After a lifetime of Brian controlling every penny, limiting my spending, making me account for every purchase, he had left me financially independent. There was something else, though, one final act of contrition. There's something else, Timothy continued hesitantly. The house. The deed transfer he arranged, the one that was supposed to give me ownership, it wasn't properly executed. The house is still legally yours. The revelations were coming too fast. I leaned against a nearby wall, trying to process it all. Mrs. Patterson, James said gently, this is excellent news from a legal standpoint, but I understand it's emotionally overwhelming. Why don't we continue this discussion somewhere more comfortable? We ended up at a quiet cafe near the police station. Over coffee, James explained the legal implications of Brian's confession and the evidence Timothy had found. The firm's clients would likely recover much of their money through insurance and the seizure of Brian's assets, but the legal proceedings would take months, possibly years. What about Melissa? I asked. What will happen to her? Based on the evidence your son provided, she'll likely face serious charges, James said. The videos clearly implicate her as a knowing accomplice. Timothy stared into his coffee cup. I can't believe I trusted her. That I chose her over. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with regret. I'm so sorry, Mom. The apology, so long awaited, finally unlocked the tears I'd been holding back. I missed you so much, I managed to say through my tears. Every day. Timothy reached across the table and took my hand. It was the first physical contact we'd had in 5 years, and it felt both strange and achingly familiar. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, he said. Maybe not ever. But I want to try to make things right. Later that afternoon, I stood in the driveway of my home again, legally and emotionally. Rebecca had driven me there after our meeting with James, offering to stay, but I needed some time alone. The house felt different now. Ghosts of memories, both good and painful, lingered in every room. In Brian's study, Melissa had left her mark, new artwork on the walls, her belongings scattered across the desk. Timothy had mentioned that the police had searched the space thoroughly, taking computers and files as evidence. I walked through slowly, reclaiming my space room by room. In the master bedroom, I found one of Melissa's dresses hanging in my closet. I removed it carefully and placed it in a box, along with her other items I found throughout the house. Whatever she had done, however she had hurt me, I wouldn't stoop to pettiness or revenge. As evening fell, I sat on the back patio, watching the sunset paint the garden in golden light, the garden I had tended for decades, that had nearly been taken from me. My phone rang. Timothy, asking if he could come by tomorrow to talk more. I agreed, grateful for the chance to begin rebuilding our relationship, however tentatively. Just as I was about to go inside, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and a momentary fear seized me. Had the police returned with more questions? Had something gone wrong? I opened the door to find a young woman I didn't recognize. She was perhaps 30, professionally dressed, with a messenger bag slung over her shoulder and an anxious expression. "Mrs. Patterson?" she asked. "I'm Jennifer Lawson. I worked at your husband's firm as a junior accountant. I need to speak with you. It's important." I hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in, curious despite my caution. "I should have come forward sooner," she said once we were seated in the living room, "but I was afraid. Your husband was very intimidating." "What is this about, Miss Lawson?" She opened her bag and removed a folder. "6 months ago, I noticed discrepancies in some client accounts. When I brought them to Mr. Patterson's attention, he told me to ignore them, said it was part of a special investment strategy." She pushed the folder toward me. "I kept copies of everything I found. After I heard about the investigation, I took these to the police, but I thought you should have copies too." I opened the folder to find financial statements, transaction records, and internal memos, more evidence of Brian's fraud. But what caught my eye was a name that appeared repeatedly throughout the documents: Ronald Gregory. Brian's closest friend and business partner. Mr. Gregory was involved in this too? I asked, stunned. Jennifer nodded grimly. He was the one who handled the actual transfers. Your husband directed everything, but Mr. Gregory executed the transactions. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Ronald, who had sat beside me at the funeral, who had embraced me, telling me how much Brian had loved me, who had offered to help me with any financial matters that arose. Ronald, who had called just yesterday, leaving a voicemail expressing concern about the investigation and offering to meet with me to protect Brian's legacy. I looked up at Jennifer, my mind racing. Does Detective Wilson know about this? Yes, but... She hesitated. Mr. Gregory is very well connected. The detective mentioned that building a case against him might be complicated. As I thanked Jennifer for her courage in coming forward, a chilling thought occurred to me. What if Ronald discovered that I now had evidence against him? What would he do to protect himself? The sense of security I had just begun to feel crumbled around me. Brian's betrayal had been devastating, but at least it was over. Now I realized that the danger might not be in the past at all. It might be very much present and closing in. After Jennifer left, I called Detective Wilson immediately, my hands shaking as I held the phone. "Mrs. Patterson," he answered, sounding tired. "What can I do for you?" "Jennifer Lawson just came to see me," I said without preamble. "She brought documents implicating Ronald Gregory in Brian's fraud scheme." There was a long pause. "I was planning to discuss that with you tomorrow. Ms. Lawson came to us a few days ago. Why didn't you tell me earlier?" "Ronald called me yesterday, wanting to meet. If I had agreed, I couldn't finish the thought." "Mrs. Patterson," Deborah, Wilson said, his tone gentler than I'd heard before. "We're monitoring Gregory closely. He doesn't know how much evidence we have against him. But you're right to be cautious. Don't meet with him under any circumstances." After hanging up, I called Timothy, then Rebecca and Margaret. Within an hour, they had all arrived at my house, along with James, who insisted on coming when his sister explained the situation. "This changes our approach," James said as we gathered in the living room. "Ronald Gregory is not just any business associate. He's one of the most influential men in the financial community. Taking him down won't be simple." "But the evidence," Timothy began. "Evidence can be disputed, witnesses discredited," James interrupted, "especially when the accused has friends in high places." Margaret nodded grimly. "Gregory sits on the boards of 3 major banks and has contributed heavily to several political campaigns. He'll have resources to fight this. So what do we do?" I asked. "Just let him get away with it." "No," James said firmly. We build a case so strong that even his connections can't save him. But that means we need to be strategic. We spent hours reviewing Jennifer's documents along with the evidence from the safe deposit box. The picture that emerged was disturbing. Ronald hadn't just assisted Brian. In many ways, he had been the architect of the entire scheme. Brian's confession had conveniently minimized Ronald's role, one last act of loyalty to his oldest friend. Around midnight, as everyone was preparing to leave, my phone rang. The screen showed unknown caller, but something told me to answer. "Hello, Deborah. It's Melissa." Her voice was barely above a whisper. I gestured frantically to the others to listen. "I don't have much time. They're letting me make one call before they transfer me." "What do you want?" "To warn you. Ronald knows about the safe deposit box. He knows what was in it. He's coming for you." A chill ran down my spine. "Why are you telling me this?" There was a bitter laugh on the other end. "Because Brian lied to me too. He promised we'd be together, that we'd have everything. Instead, he set me up to take the fall alongside him. Ronald was his real partner, not me." She paused. "I was just a convenient distraction for both of you." "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "Look, I'm not asking for forgiveness. What I did to you, to Timothy, I can't undo that. But Ronald Gregory is dangerous, more dangerous than Brian ever was." "What do you mean?" "The money that's missing, the 40 million that's been discovered so far. That's just what's been found. The real number is closer to 70 million, and most of it is with Ronald. He'll do anything to keep it." A voice in the background told her to wrap it up. "Be careful, Deborah," she said hurriedly. "Check the garden shed, back wall, behind the toolbox." The line went dead. We stared at each other in stunned silence. Then Timothy was on his feet. "The shed. We need to check it now." We found it exactly where Melissa had said, a waterproof container hidden in a hollow space behind the large toolbox that had stood in the same spot for as long as I could remember. Inside were USB drives, documents, and a handwritten letter from Brian addressed to me. "Deborah, if you're reading this, then everything has fallen apart. I've tried to protect you by keeping you ignorant of my activities, but that same ignorance may now endanger you. Ronald is not who you think he is. Our fraud began small, covering losses, borrowing from one client to pay another. But Ronald saw bigger opportunities. He pushed for more. When I wanted to stop, to confess, he reminded me of what we stood to lose, what you and Timothy stood to lose. The evidence in this container proves his involvement. It's insurance, my final attempt to protect you. If the worst happens, if Ronald approaches you after my death, do not trust him. Take this evidence directly to the authorities. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. The life we built was founded on lies, mine, not yours. In my final days, this is the only truth I can offer you. I did love you, even as I betrayed you in ways you may never fully understand. Brian." I folded the letter with trembling hands. Detective Wilson arrived 20 minutes later, taking possession of the container and its contents. After documenting everything, he looked more energized than I'd seen him. "This is the smoking gun we needed," he said. "We'll move on Gregory immediately." "Will it be enough?" I asked. Wilson nodded firmly. "Combined with what we already have. More than enough. And Mrs. Patterson," he added as he was leaving, "we'll have officers watching your house tonight, just as a precaution." The next morning brought news that Ronald Gregory had been arrested while attempting to board a private plane to a country with no extradition treaty. The financial community was in shock, the scandal making headlines nationwide. My phone rang constantly, reporters seeking comments, former friends suddenly remembering our connection, distant relatives offering support they had never shown before. I ignored them all, focusing instead on the quiet conversation happening in my kitchen. Timothy sat across from me, both of us nursing cups of coffee as we tentatively navigated the fragile beginnings of reconciliation. "I keep thinking about all the time we lost," he said, staring into his cup. 5 years. Important years. "We can't get them back," I said gently, "but we have now. And the future." He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep and emotion. "How can you even look at me after everything I said to you? The way I treated you at the funeral. Bringing Melissa, saying those horrible things. You're my son," I said simply. "I never stopped loving you, even when it hurt the most." Tears spilled down his cheeks. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Forgiveness isn't about deserving. It's a choice. And I choose to forgive you, Timothy. I choose us, our relationship, over the pain of the past." The weeks that followed were a blur of legal meetings, police interviews, and court appearances. Ronald's arrest had opened the floodgates, with multiple investigations revealing the full extent of the fraud. Clients would eventually recover most of their money, though the process would take years. Melissa pleaded guilty to lesser charges in exchange for her testimony against Ronald. I never saw her again after the funeral, though I heard through Timothy that she had written him a letter of apology from prison. 3 months after Brian's funeral, I stood in the garden, pruning roses on a warm spring afternoon. The house was quiet, peaceful in a way it hadn't been for years. I had decided to keep it, despite the painful memories. It was home, after all, and I refused to let Brian's betrayal take that from me too. Margaret had helped me understand and manage my newfound financial independence. The redemption fund Brian had established for me was indeed legitimate, one final act of contrition. I had donated a significant portion to organizations supporting victims of financial and domestic abuse, finding a kind of healing in turning Brian's money toward helping others who had suffered similar manipulation. The garden gate opened, and Timothy appeared, carrying a small potted tree. He had moved into an apartment nearby and visited almost daily, each interaction gradually rebuilding the trust between us. "Mom," he called, smiling. "I brought something for the garden." "What is it?" I asked, setting down my pruning shears. "A new beginning." He placed the pot on the ground, a young apple tree, its branches already dotted with tiny buds. "I thought we could plant it together." We worked side by side, digging the hole, carefully transferring the sapling, patting the soil around its base. When we finished, Timothy stepped back, surveying our work. "Do you think it'll grow strong?" he asked, and I heard the question beneath his words. I looked at the tree, then at my son, both fragile now, both full of potential. "With care and time," I said, "yes, I believe it will." That evening, as twilight settled over the garden, I sat on the patio with a glass of wine, watching the shadows lengthen across the lawn. My phone pinged with a text from Rebecca, confirming our lunch plans for tomorrow. Another from Margaret about a charity event she thought I might want to attend. Small, normal interactions that once would have seemed insignificant but now represented the independent life I was building. A year ago, I had been living in a beautiful cage, unaware of its bars. My husband had controlled everything, our finances, our social circle, even my relationship with our son. His death had not only revealed his betrayal but had also, ironically, set me free. The pain hadn't disappeared. There were still nights when I woke up reaching for someone who was no longer there, still moments when a memory would catch me off guard and leave me breathless with grief, not for the man Brian had turned out to be, but for the man I had thought he was, for the life I had believed we shared. Yet alongside the pain, something new had blossomed. Strength I hadn't known I possessed. Independence I had never been allowed to develop. Relationships based on mutual respect rather than manipulation and control. In his final confession, Brian had written that our life together had been founded on lies. But that wasn't entirely true. My love had been real. My commitment had been real. My resilience, emerging now from the ashes of betrayal, was the most real thing of all. As darkness fell completely, I stood and walked to the newly planted apple tree, its slender form barely visible in the gathering night. I touched a branch gently, feeling the smoothness of new growth beneath my fingers. A new beginning, I whispered, echoing Timothy's words. The old life was gone, its foundations revealed as corrupt and false. But from its ruins, I was building something authentic and strong, a life truly my own at last. I turned back toward the house, its windows glowing with welcoming light. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new healing, new growth. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was ready to face it all on my own terms, scarred but not broken, wounded but wiser, and finally, completely free.